You're watching Breakthrough News.
I'm Charlotte Tenhoenstein, and you're watching Breakthrough News on BTR Today. Today, we're talking about the fascinating enterprise of making music with whales and other animals. I'm joined by David Rothenberg. David, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me, Charlotte.
Thanks for coming on. David is a professor is a musician and a philosopher, and a professor in both these subjects at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. David, you've published several books on your work and also released several CDs on the results of jamming with these various species, ranging from birds to whales to even insects now.
That's right.
So it's absolutely mind-boggling to me. So I'm super excited about this conversation. So the big questions are: is it possible for animals to have real creative artistic impulses? And if so, can we collaborate with them? So I guess just to start off, you obviously think that the answer to both these questions is yes, and you've been experiencing it firsthand for several years now.
That's right. And, it's not an idea that originates with me. It's an idea that goes back through all of human history. People have been obsessed with animals and their beauty and their creativity and their life and their spirit. And some would say in the modern world, we might be a little distanced from that. But if you look back to the theory of evolution and what Charles Darwin actually wrote about, he said that he recognized that animals were doing all kinds of creative things. He said birds have a natural aesthetic sense. That's why they have such beautiful feathers and sing such beautiful songs.
So let's talk a bit at first just about your general approach to music, which surely goes beyond, the idea of composing songs. I mean, improvisation seems to be a big part of it, right? And even the sense that you can hear music in all these different manifestations in the wild.
Yeah, I think that I would consider myself a jazz musician, even though one who doesn't often play from the standard jazz repertoire. I came up studying improvisation and being very interested in how jazz was a kind of music that seemed to be open to many kinds of music from throughout the world. Music from India and Japan, as well as the whole Western tradition. But through improvisation, you can learn to connect to music in a very unfamiliar situation. You could sit down with someone you might be unable to speak with, who doesn't speak English or a language that I can speak, but I can make music together with them.
Or isn't even a human.
That's the next step. The first step is you can do it with humans, but then why not try with other species? Why should we assume we're the only ones who are musical? Because a lot of the sounds animals make are much closer to music than they are to language.
And there's this sense of, which I think you've talked about it before, of this idea that music actually might be a much better way to communicate with animals than language, full stop.
I'd say
right?
In one sense, it's really easier because look at how people communicate with music. Music is so important for us, but we don't quite know why. What is it actually doing? What does it actually say? What's the real meaning of a piece of music that doesn't have words to tell us what it means? We know it's very emotional. We know it's important to us, but you can't exactly describe what it means. And so when you can communicate with music without entirely understanding what's happening. So that's one reason you can do it with animals who are making music, and you have some interaction. You don't quite know what is happening, but something about it seems real and present, and that a connection can be there, and you don't quite know what it is.
So this idea of as you said, you don't even have to know exactly what you're communicating to form a connection
in
with
a way
someone.
You can't. We don't quite know what music means, but we know it's important and that it goes beyond our certainty. So it's a wonderful way to communicate in these uncertain situations. When you're together with animals with whom you cannot speak, music can be somehow made together. Often it doesn't work, but sometimes it does.
Well, what I find funny is there was a quote in one of your articles about how often it's a very lonely process. So most of the time you don't get anything back from the animal or the whale, which we'll get to in a second. But then when you do, it's particularly thrilling. But then you said, as with improvising with humans, which I thought was
that's right. Often you're with
surprising.
If you look at this, scientists have very carefully studied nightingales, for example, particularly in Berlin, in Germany, where I spent last year on sabbatical. There's a lot of scientists studying nightingales, and they've figured out how they communicate with each other. And the males are singing, and they sing at night, and also during the day, but especially at night. And when they're competing with each other, they sort of try and interrupt each other. One will start singing, another will immediately interrupt and say, no, I'm singing here. I'm getting in the way of your statement. Once they've acknowledged they have...
It's a sing-off.
Right. Once they've acknowledged they have separate territories, one's going to sing, then they'll stop, and the next one will sing. They leave space for each other, keep singing. That's a sort of sign of friendliness. And then those at the top of the heap, the most dominant males, just ignore everyone else. Maybe they listen, maybe they don't. It just doesn't matter.
Wow.
And I think any jazz musician would say, if you're playing with human jazz musicians, these three types are quite common to same thing is going on.
Which you see firsthand.
Yeah,
as
I think
well.
any musician would say they've met people of these three different types.
Wow.
Oh, were you playing then? You know, I didn't notice. Were you even in the room?
God, wow. That sounds quite scary, actually. But
Don't you know people like that?
I guess I'm not. Yeah, let's not dwell on that. But so what's so special about whales?
Well, the interesting thing about humpback whales in particular is they have this incredibly long, involved, and complex song that no humans knew anything about until the 1960s. We just didn't know.
Other whales, we did have a few, right? I mean, like beluga whales, there are writings.
That's right. Beluga whales
16th
sing above
century.
the water, and they're similar to dolphins. They make sounds we can hear, and they come up and engage. And they also use sound a lot more like language, interacting with each other. But this humpback whale thing is really a song, a long performed song. And when this was discovered, kind of inadvertently by the U.S. Navy, who was listening underwater, they couldn't believe this was happening. They thought it was secret codes from Russian submarines or something.
Those Russians.
They wanted to believe they were reaching some secret codes, but the whales were making these long songs, and it was just an astonishing discovery. And once the general public found out about it, because this was pretty soon declassified, because it was a more general than, you know,
once they realized that the whales were not a threat to national security.
That's right. They said everyone should hear this. It's so beautiful. And it's the discovery of this song, that really got people interested in saving whales. Until that moment, whales were sort of off the radar of conservationists.
And this was in 1970 when they came out with this record, and as you say, almost single-handedly started this save the whales movement. So you go out on a boat and you play clarinet into an underwater speaker, and then you have headphones that are linked to an underwater microphone, so you can.
That's right. It's like I'm down there. I'm making music in their environment. I'm listening to it, and I try to do this often, but it's difficult to set up. There's so many obstacles, and then you
not least because it's actually illegal.
That's right. It's a form of marine mammal harassment. You shouldn't harass marine mammals. We don't know what might upset them, so. Back off.
Well, I'm sure your playing's fine, but like maybe other less skilled musicians, that might
that's
really
not
be
the
harassment.
The law treats all music equally as something you shouldn't do, and the idea is to protect these animals. I can't dispute the intent of that law. I would say if I had the sense that
I'll just dispute the law.
if I got the sense the animals were getting upset, I would stop.
Well, presumably they would just either overturn your boat or
they might
swim away.
But those that believe in the precautionary approach would say that you don't know what it's doing. Maybe over time it upsets their song, changes the way they communicate. We don't know, so maybe better not to mess with what we don't know. So that's the argument behind this law.
Well, that goes against a lot of science.
Well, scientists, if you read the scientific permits, they're allowed to do anything with these whales. They get special permission to investigate them, and they're supposed to police themselves. But I think most whale scientists are rather responsible. What the less responsible humans are the ones that are making a lot of noise underwater, like huge amounts of boats, very loud propellers and other sounds, and plus the testing of sonar by some branches of the Navy that is making just too much noise, and that's definitely damaging many species of whales, although not so much humpbacks. I have to say that there's also many people working for the Navy studying the communication of whales. It's probably the agency that spends the most research money and time on trying to figure out what the whales are doing is the Navy. So they're not just trying to upset whales in the name of national security. They'd really like to understand them.
Well, we're going to take a break in a second, but before we do, I just want to ask, so how do you know when the whales are actually responding to you as opposed to just making sounds and you're kind of tagging along?
Honestly, you don't. I mean, basically you can't tell, but when it seems like they are is if you start to notice the kinds of sounds they're making. If you hear, when I played a clarinet tone, which tends to be more of a single pitch, like doo, and the whales are usually going ooh, ooh, ooh.
That's quite good.
Like, but then when you hear a
Impersonation.
whale try and play a steady note, they try and go, ooh.
Oh, so you
hear
can
them
tell
like,
that they're like
he's really
trying to
doing something
imitate.
different.
So it's sort of a game of like imitation almost.
Maybe, but I wouldn't say they're necessarily imitating as much as joining in and finding a way to connect their musical world, whatever these sounds mean to them. They're testing out this new idea, because one unusual thing about humpback whales is they're always changing their song. Most animals don't do that. They have a set song. That's what they've learned to do. That's what they use. But these whales change their song. And strangely enough, they all change it together. When one starts singing a new song, the others all pick up the new song very rapidly over a matter of days and weeks and months. They'll pick up the new song. And this changes. You can really sense the change if you go back 1 month and then go back the next. They're all singing something a little bit different. We don't know why they need to do that, because that kind of mass change of one song to another is very rare in the animal world.
Wow. I just imagine that there's a tension between, and I feel like this is often probably the way with most sort of extraordinary discoveries, where on the one hand you think, oh my god, I'm witnessing the most incredible thing ever, you know, like this insight into this profound mystery, and then on the other hand, like, is it just in my head, and am I literally crazy? You know, how do you deal with that?
I don't know what it means, you know.
But you feel it to be true.
I feel that sometimes interesting music, at least interesting to me, is made together with the whale sound and what I'm doing live. Some interesting thing happens that I like, and then I'll put that aside and say, okay, here it is. Okay. What do you think? And a lot of people don't like it. You know, other people say, well, this is really interesting. And it's somewhat different from what is expected. I mean, there are a lot of examples of human music combined with whales, and often people are playing some kind of soft, repetitive, meditative thing, and the whale sound is added and it sounds good. And I myself have made music like that in the studio with whale songs, and there you have complete control. You can do anything. But in the live situation, excites me more, because you really just don't know what is going to happen.
But the idea that the whale, how necessary is it in your in this whole enterprise? How necessary is it to believe that the whale is deliberately interacting with you, as opposed to you're just inspired by it, you're inspired by the situation, and you're getting this incredible music out of it?
It's more interesting because it makes it more of a two-way street. It's like, if the whale is actually interested in what I'm doing, that's kind of cool. If you could hear that.
Yeah.
And some the best examples, you know, it's that can be heard. Many people hear it and they sense what's happening, and that's quite fascinating. Compared to, you know, I hear an interesting sound, I can do something. I mean, if anyone out there is planning to do this, the one advice I give is just leave a lot of space. Don't play all the time. Play a little bit, listen, think about what you're hearing, and then maybe change what you would do in the moment in relation to what you're hearing. So when people ask me, well, like, why don't you play like country or EDM? Why don't you play EDM for the whales, like some real electronic stuff? I says, I don't know what I'm playing as much as some kind of sound I think might interact with what they're doing. So the main thing is to leave space for whatever else is out there. But I would encourage people, you know, who want to break the letter of the law a little bit. If you want to do this, don't do it all the time. Do it.
There are worse ways to break the law. That's
right. Do it with a little respect and leave space and listen.
Okay. Well, I will say that Breakthrough Radio is not advocating breaking the law on this show.
Nothing called Breakthrough would advocate something like that.
Right, of course. Well, we are going to take a break. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from the latest episode of Live Studio featuring Future of What?
Tried it, but I'd do it again. If you tell me you liked it, or might have thought it's done. Ship's fine, now it's real. The grass, it grows so long. It's not a lawn, it's a field.
And we're back with David Rothenberg talking about making music with whales. So, David, there has been a lot of backlash from the scientific community against your work. particularly when in the discussions of bird song, you know, but I'm sure it applies to any animal that you take, you know, this idea that you're elevating what's actually very practical type of behavior that sounds kind of musical, but, you know, in the case of birds is just to attract mates and repel threats. Why? I mean, it sounds like a very sensible explanation. Why isn't it enough?
One whale scientist who said when I interviewed him, he says, "You're just fucking with animals for the hell of it." And so I don't know if you can say that in your show.
Words.
You probably can. You're not on the radio. And so I turned that into a whole song. I just took his sounds and remixed them. Fucking with animals, fucking with animals. So if you want to hear that, that's on the Whale Music Remixed album from a few years ago.
Wow, and now he probably really hates
no,
you.
he's never said anything. Every time anyone's interviewed him about this, which is a few times, he's only said nice things. But he's a character, and he's a good whale scientist. And the fact is, you know, scientists often say, well, you're just messing with the subjects of our research. You're playing around with them. How do you know what your things are doing to them? You're not studying carefully. You're not being careful. You're not doing a research program. You're just fucking with animals for the hell of it. And so in that regard, I'm saying, well, you know, I'm making music with them. And I would answer to that criticism. I'm taking them seriously in a way that you are not. If you're just thinking them as objects of research, I'm thinking them as individuals, animals, creatures you can interact with and share a sense of the love and performance of music with. And some might say that's just crazy arrogance, but I think it's just an interesting thing to try out.
But so the difference is, I mean, what you're trying to prove, because I mean, I'm sure you can happily accommodate that sometimes birds would make sounds to attract a mate or to repel a threat, but you're saying that it's more than that, and that they enjoy it, and that there's something artistic and almost unnecessary about it, just beyond.
Yeah, I'm saying that, and so was Charles Darwin. I haven't gotten to that. To answer that criticism, I'd say, okay, yes, it's true. Male birds are singing territories and attract mates. Most of these singing species are doing that. That's the answer to why birds sing. But why then does one bird sing a small song like a chickadee going doo doo? That's the song of the chickadee. Doo doo. That's enough. And how come the mockingbird has to go pew 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 and go on for an hour for the same purpose and function? He's doing the same thing, but what's different about this bird is a question of aesthetics. It's a question of musicality, and the difference is not encompassed by that explanation. The scientists who say that's enough of an explanation are not getting into exactly what is being done by these birds. They're choosing to ignore that and say, I have nothing to say. It's not interesting to ask why this bird needs to make this sound as opposed to this other sound.
I imagine you could actually probably make a comparison to cooking for humans. You know, like, yes, on the most baseline level, we enjoy, or we have to cook, you know, to feed ourselves, or like prepare food to feed ourselves. But then beyond that, there's a huge amount of creativity and sophistication.
Yeah, or of human music. People say human music is just to defend territories and attract mates. And you can say that, and it's not very interesting. It's partially true. It doesn't say much about the music. If you take,
I'm not sure how the defending territories would.
Oh, sure, I'm making my music here. Any musician will say, you know, no, I'm the one who plays like this. You know, you can't musical territories. You know, hip hop is all about that. Constantly, you know, artists, you know, there's just dissing some other rapper, like he's full of shit, he doesn't know what he's doing. You know, I've got the rhymes, you don't have them. You know, it's all competition. And the same, you know, in instrumental music, you know, in classical music, virtuosos playing against each other, jazz competitiveness, or, you know, it's clearly part of it. And
but is it all of it? And
no, of course
you're
it's
saying
not.
is
It's just part
no,
of it.
and for animals, it's not all of it either.
The function does not explain the behavior so much as what it's, you know, you can't just come up with the reason for something that is structured and beautiful and, you know, otherwise seems like arbitrary. If all you care about is function, the nature of what's being done ends up sounding arbitrary. Anything could have evolved. You know, that's an aspect of natural selection. Anything could evolve. It might stick if it becomes useful over the generations or preferred over the generations. Okay, if you believe in survival of the fittest, if some trait evolves through a random mutation or whatever, it's retained if it ends up being advantageous. So what's advantageous, say, about the tail of a peacock? It's this huge, crazy thing you have to drag around. And what's the point of that? It's obviously be easier not to have that tail. So the desire for beauty in female peacocks is supposed to be the quality that makes this happen over generations. And most animals don't have such excessive beauty, something that evolves that seems really extreme. Just like the humpback whale song is really extreme, 23 hours of singing. That's extreme.
Oh my
Doesn't usually
God.
happen, you know.
Wow,
Or
that
bird
puts like,
nightingales,
singers
hours
to
and
shame.
hours of singing throughout the night. You know, it's like this evolved, but it's not it's usually this extreme stuff doesn't evolve. If you're interested in the music of nature, then extremes make good examples.
Mm.
You should investigate these. Why is this possible sometimes? And the very fact that it's possible suggests that there's the possibility for the need.
Some sort of
music
aesthetic
to evolve.
appreciation.
Yeah, aesthetics is part of
Right.
evolution, and I think if you pay attention to what's out there, if you look and you listen to what's really out there in the world, it will be hard to disagree with that.
And you incorporate serious scientific tools into your research.
Yeah, I
Right,
like to
yeah.
collaborate with scientists. And when I started doing this, I was somewhat arrogant and naive. And in the book Why Birds Sing, I kind of challenged scientists. I say,
You're like,
you know what
I
you're
need these
talking
guys on my
about,
side.
You know what you're talking about. They said, look, you know, why be so harsh? And many of them said I wasn't saying anything of use to them, but a handful said, you know, you're right. We could try and study musicality in bird song in a scientific, statistical, quantifiable way. And over the years, I've been working with this team at CUNY, at first at City College, then now they're at Hunter College, this lab run by the scientist Ofer Chernikovsky. And he's studying all the sounds birds make as they learn to sing. And previously, he studied birds with very simple songs and recorded every sound they made as they learned to sing. And I said, why don't you try the same approach on single, long, complex songs? Maybe we could figure out statistically what structural elements might be in there. So it's a very quantifiable way of
It's
trying to
rigorous.
understand music. Yeah, rigorous in
Right.
the standard scientific way. And so we're trying to do that. We started publishing some papers. And they're very different than the kind of writing I usually do, just telling interesting stories about people and animals. The scientific work is statistical and dry, and it's got diagrams and things like that.
And it's surely good to have both. But
Yeah, it's a different kind of. People ask, well, how should science and art be combined? And I say they really have different criteria for truth. So, for example, I can make one recording, one moment, several minutes, like on my whale music CD, and the track called "Never Satisfied." One moment where the whale and the clarinet seem to come together in something musically interesting. Why is that piece called Never Satisfied? Because that is the name of the boat used by the whale song scientist Jim Darling. His boat's called the Never Satisfied because he's never satisfied, never has enough certainty, never has enough data. You have to go out and collect more and more and more. And to make my musical interaction something scientific, I have to do it like 1,000 times. And then statistically analyze it. And it would be nice to do that. I'd love to do it. But the effort involved in making these encounters happen is so far difficult enough that I can't do it all that often. So I would like to.
I wanted to ask actually earlier, and now you've mentioned it again. Is there something specific about the clarinet that you think whales respond particularly well to, or is that just the instrument that you happen to play very, very
It's
well?
the instrument I happen to play. I don't know how well I play it, but I play okay. And then it has a range, strangely enough, similar to the human voice. And the range of the human voice is actually similar to the humpback whale.
That was another thing I wanted to ask. Was, could you just sing into the?
Yeah, people do. Sometimes I've heard them sing to the whales without listening to the whales. They'll just go, oh, they don't stop, and it's just like the whales are like a background to someone's vision. They don't stop.
Well, they want their whales to be an audience.
You have to leave space, really listen. And also the sign that you're listening is that your own human music is changing in the presence of the whale song. You have to be able to accept that, to realize this will transform you. And when people ask me, well, has doing this changed the way you play with humans? I would say, of course it has. It's really made me want to listen better and wanted to leave space for other people. And this last project, the Cicada Dream Band is a trio of very different kinds of musicians, all really listening to each other. And
are you not including the cicadas?
Well, we played with cicadas live on the record. The cicadas are played by me on the computer as a kind of additional instrument. We have played live with cicadas. We put them on microphones just like this, and they behave pretty well. And that's
and they feel like stars.
They just sing. I think cicadas are. They're much more part of this whole group mind. When you're playing with insects, there's so many millions of them usually that it humbles you to be part of it.
This whole process
but-
sounds quite humbling. to be
Yeah,
honest.
but it's actually it's strange but exciting. Like it goes in different surprising directions. Like when I was playing last year when the 17-year cicadas emerged, which happens once every 17 years.
Mm.
You're just in the middle of millions of singing insects making shh, this kind of surrounding sound. At first, it sounds all like noise. When you get used to it, you realize there's all this structure, there's this beauty, this is form, and it gets quite exciting.
Wow. Well, we're going to wrap up in a second. Before we do, my final question to you is, are there any other animals on your radar right
Thousands
now?
of other possibilities that.
Any
say that-
special ones?
Then I'm going to do more things with humpback whales and with nightingales, because the idea of nightingales are so famous in literature and culture, and yet people don't listen to them that seriously and are quite surprised that they actually sound like electronic musicians. They sound like DJs or people playing laptops or synthesizers and going boo, 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 boo. They're so
Whoa.
electronic. And how can this electronic sound be this beautiful bird of romantic poetry, of Shakespeare, Coleridge and John Clare? And
EDM's very romantic.
that's right. It's very romantic. And the nightingales are part of it. And particularly in Berlin, where you have electronic music everywhere. So I'm really going to go back and
You sure it's not just the Berlin nightingales? Who are,
Yeah,
like,
that's a good
particularly-
question. There are certainly a lot more nightingales in
Maybe
Berlin
if you went to
than
like
you might expect.
Barcelona.
I think there's so many more nightingales in Berlin than one would expect in a city. And
Mm.
the standard reason is that there's just a lot of big green spaces there, but maybe they're just there for the music scene.
Well, on that note, we will finish there. Thank you very much, David, for joining me today. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a bonus edition of BTR Live Studio this week on breakthroughradio.com featuring Gramercy Arms. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Be sure to check out breakthroughradio.com for our continued Future Week coverage, including a closer look at the soft and hairy future of cities, to borrow a phrase from Salvador Dali. That's it for what's breaking through the news here at Breakthrough Radio today. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter at breakthroughradio.com. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and thank you for joining us.